There was a moment in the 20th century when a group of architects looked at beauty and decided it was a problem. Not an accident, not a limitation, just a problem. Ornament, symmetry, warmth and design, these were things they associated with dishonesty, with a civilization that had dressed itself up in fine clothes while conducting 2 world wars and industrial-scale human suffering. So they reached for the most honest material they could find, concrete. In this video, we're going under the skin of brutalist architecture, what it was really built for, why it unsettles people the way it does, and what it reveals about the architects who chose brutality as a design of language. Stay tuned, and if this is the kind of history that makes you think, consider subscribing. We go deep on this channel. The movement had a name for this material language, Bête brute, which is simply French for raw concrete. Le Corbusier used the phrase, and the philosophy behind it spread fast. The idea was that a building should tell you exactly what it is made of and exactly how it holds itself up. The psychological weight of that was actually very intentional. These architects understood that exposed concrete does something to a person standing beneath it. It's simply indifferent to your comfort, and that indifference was the point. The material also ages in a way no other building material quite does. It stains, it streaks, it absorbs water and darkens like a wound. It was chosen precisely because it refuses to age gracefully. What made brutalism genuinely strange was that it arrived wrapped in idealism. Housing estates, universities, civic centers, government buildings, these were structures meant to serve ordinary people, and the architects behind them believed with real conviction that stripping design down to its raw bones was a form of respect. There was a democratic argument buried in all that concrete, that working class people deserved buildings as serious and uncompromising as any cathedral. But the public didn't receive it that way. People moved into these estates and felt the weight of the walls differently than the architects had imagined. The scale crushed rather than liberated. The grey absorbed light rather than redirecting it. What was drawn on paper as a utopian fortress, read in person as a place the world had forgotten to finish. At some point, the social promise of brutalism collapsed inward, and what replaced it was something that felt less like architecture for people and more like architecture of a people. The early ambition had been genuine. Housing estates, libraries, and civic halls built for communities that had never had anything built specifically for them. But the design logic that made these buildings so uncompromising had a problem it couldn't solve. The same principles that were meant to dignify ordinary life also produced buildings that looked from the outside like they had been designed to contain something rather than welcome someone. The geometry was a tell. Brutalist structures didn't taper or curve towards the human body. They jutted, they cantilevered, and they stacked mass upon mass in ways that made the person standing at the base feel like an afterthought. Architects working in this language were deeply aware of scale as a tool. A building that dwarfs you is a building that speaks before you do. And what it says is that the institution it houses outlasts you, outweighs you, and existed before you arrived. That message worked fine for a government ministry or a university. It worked considerably less well for a block of flats where someone was supposed to feel at home. What followed was a slow but total reabsorption of brutalist imagery into a completely different kind of storytelling. Filmmakers noticed what the public had already felt, that these buildings carried a specific atmosphere of cold authority. They started appearing in films not as housing or civic infrastructure, but as the visual backdrop for surveillance states, collapsed societies, and institutional violence. The concrete bunker became shorthand for a world where the individual had already lost. Directors didn't need to explain the politics of a scene if they shot it inside one of these structures. The architecture did that work on its own. What had started as a utopian building type had become, in the cultural imagination, the most recognizable image of a future gone wrong. There's a particular quality of light inside a brutalist building that has nothing to do with the time of day. The shadows collect in corners like they were poured there deliberately. And in a sense, they were. The architects who worked in this tradition made a specific decision to refuse color, not just to minimize it, but to treat its absence as a kind of structural honesty. Grey was not a neutral choice. It was a statement that the building would not perform warmth it did not possess, and would not use surface decoration to manage your emotional response. The result is an environment that feels seasonless in the worst possible way. Standing inside one of these structures on a bright afternoon produces the same quality of atmosphere as standing inside one on an overcast morning in, say, November. The texture of the concrete itself carries a history most people walk past without reading. When concrete is poured, it takes the shape of whatever contains it. And in brutalist construction, those containers were wooden formwork, rough planks, grain patterns, and the slight imperfections of cut timber. When the formwork was stripped away, all of that was left behind, pressed permanently into the surface of the stone. The architects called this honesty. The wood that shaped the wall is gone, but its memory is carved into every panel. You're looking at a material that recorded its own making and then refused to move on from it. That permanence is part of why these surfaces feel so heavy, not just physically, but in the way that things which cannot change feel heavy. What these buildings communicate now, decades after they were built, is something the architects never intended, but perhaps made inevitable. They feel less like places people once inhabited and more like evidence of an idea that ran its course. The scale is too large for the silence they now carry. The concrete has darkened and streaked in patterns that look less like withering and more like a building expressing something it was never given a language for. People move through them or around them with the specific discomfort of someone walking through a space that belongs to a version of the future that never arrived. One that was drawn with total confidence, poured with conviction, and then left standing long after the conviction dissolved. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.